to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, we'll learn about different mixed tactics, some of them that were played in real games, other ones are positions that could be from real games. Well, we learned already about many different patterns such as forks or pins or discoveries or stalemate or checkmate or various other things. Now in this lesson we'll kind of mix them all together, and I'll give you the chance to try to figure them out without much hints at first. So let's get started with the first example. Here we are. In this position it was black's turn to move. Well, first of all, try to think what would be your first idea to do here if you're black. Well, I'm hoping your first idea was to capture the white queen on d8. But then I'm hoping that you really quick realized that that would be actually a big mistake to capture the queen. Why? Because all of a sudden white now is in stalemate. Remember situations when a king is not directly attacked and yet neither the king or any of the other pieces of the same color can move? Those positions are stalemate. So let's go back. Now that we know that the most natural move, that is to capture the white queen on d8, is a blunder, knowing that we're up a pawn from black's perspective, let's see what's the best and most efficient way to win this game. Well, I'll give you a hint. The best way, the easiest way to win this game would be, obviously avoiding the stalemate, is to get rid of the queens on the board, and then black would have a far advanced passed pawn ready to promote real soon. While giving, let's say, a check with the queen on c3 or say on f4 or some other place is certainly playable and gives black a significant advantage. But it wouldn't make things as easy as after the queen g5 check. Because what happens now? If black exchanged the queens, black would simply recapture, and then the f-pawn would be unstoppable. On the other hand, the big difference is that if now the king moves out of the check, then already black can safely and for free capture the white queen, because now it came with a check. So we're not talking about any kind of stalemate, because here after king e5 the major and decisive difference is that it's black's turn. It's not white's turn, and therefore it's not a stalemate. Black can, for example, give a check, and then when the king moves, then already can safely, for example, advance the f-pawn. White has several moves, and we're not worrying about stalemate. Or worrying, it's okay, but definitely we didn't fall into a stalemate, which of course would be a very unpleasant and unfortunate thing when you are up a queen. So this example was about stalemate, and in the actual game black realized that and avoided a stalemate and won the game. White resigned after black played queen g5. Let's move on and now learn about something totally different. What do we see here at this position? White has an extra knight, although black has 2 pawns as compensation. However, more importantly, white's problem here is that the king on f1 is kind of naked. It does not have pieces or even pawns in front of it. Generally, you would want to keep pawns in front of your kings. That's the primary reason why generally in the opening, in the beginning of the game, we try to castle so we can hide our kings behind our pawns towards the side of the board. But as you can see in this case, black already removed all those white pawns, and therefore the white king is in major danger. The other problem that white has in this position is that their queen is on an unprotected square. So, what does black need to do? First of all, black needs to do something very forceful and right here, right now, because otherwise white is also threatening to advance with a check his own pawn as well as bring the queen down to h8. So black has a lot of threats to deal with. However, if they act first, if they arrive first, the white threats will evaporate. And here the forceful move is either to check from f5 or to check from f6 or to check with the rook. So basically what you would need to do is try to compare one with another and see which one may work out best. I suggest you try to play around with it and make your own choice before you listen further. It's a big difference which one you would choose. The only correct choice is to give the check with the queen on f5. Why? Because if now the king moves out of the check, white pays for the fact that the queen is on an unprotected square and can give a skewer, and then when the king moves out, the white queen falls down. On the other hand, if after queen f5 white would try to block the check with queen f2, then we're dealing with a pin problem. Rook f4 and the queen is tied to the king. It cannot run away. The best white can do give it up for the rook, but here already black's advantage again is quite clear. This is also from a game played last year in 2010 in Russia. And now let's move on to yet a different type of situation. We can see that white has a queen on h6 and a pawn on f6, and as we know, that's a very dangerous combination when the black king is on g8, and especially when black has no opportunity to protect that key g7 square where white is about to bring the queen and checkmate. So the only thing that black can hope for in this position is counterattack. However, there is no time to waste. There is no room for a quiet moves because the checkmate is around the corner. So the only move, and it's a hint, is to make a forceful move that does not allow white to checkmate on the next move. So it's kind of a giveaway. Black needs to check the white king, sacrifice the queen even if that's the price. White has only one response, and again black needs to follow up with a check, otherwise white checkmates. And one of those lucky situations when we were trying to just delay the checkmate the opponent was about to give us, and it turned out that we checkmated our opponent, because right now the white king is under attack, and because the black bishop is pinning the white rook, white cannot block the check either, and it's game over for white. A pretty beautiful combination. And let's move on to yet again something very different. What do we see here in front of us? We see black still having his queen on the board, which as we know is a tremendous advantage. White of course has a bishop and two pawns as compensation, but generally that's certainly not sufficient against the queen. But here the important point is that white by two forceful checks can get rid of black's queen. So in this case white has two options to check the black king, either with the rook on a7 or from g8. Try to think which may work better. Moving the rook to a7 wouldn't be the best idea, because the black king could, for example, just capture the pawn on g6, and there is no excellent follow-up to it to win the game for white. So therefore the correct choice is to move the rook to g8. And what's important here is that this move forces the black king onto the H file, the same file where the black queen is. And now the point wasn't just to save the G6 pawn, but it was to get the king and the queen on the same file, and now it's skewer time. Check, king moves out of the check, and the queen falls, and tables have turned. White kept his extra bishop and extra pawn, while black lost the queen. A very nice pattern. And let's resume with the next example that is, and again, a totally different type of pattern. But one thing is common is that we're again looking for forceful moves. If you look at the position on the board right here, we'll see that black is ahead at the moment, black having an extra queen versus only a rook and knight. Generally speaking, a rook and knight is insufficient compensation for a queen. But here, because of immediate tactics, the tables will turn again. And it's important that we're talking about forceful moves, because simply wishing that the opponent would make things work, for example, in this case, that the black king would move to e7, that's wishful thinking. But unless we force our opponent to do so, it's not going to happen. So, in order to not give our opponent a choice, the answer is to play rook d8. Check. Now black doesn't have a choice. The king must move to e7, and white is ready to fork with knight d5. Check again. And white doesn't even mind losing his rook, because white is getting the black queen. And of course, giving up a rook for getting your opponent's queen is generally a good choice. A position like this, when white is up a knight with equal number of pawns on the board without a passed pawn on the other side, is a typically very easy technical win. Let's move on to our next example, where we'll see again a totally different pattern. And in this position it was black's turn, and black has an option to capture a white piece immediately, or of course not to capture it. If black right now would be greedy and would go after the white pawn on d5, would pay for it dearly. What would white do right now? Well, remember, always look out for the forceful moves. And here what happened is black has just positioned the queen into a potential discovery. Be careful about pins and discoveries, because right now it seems like the black queen is pinning the white bishop. So if this bishop now moves, then the queen will capture the rook. That is certainly true, except if that bishop moves away by giving a check. Now, not only that the black queen doesn't have the time to capture the white rook, the black queen is lost, because while black is busy answering the check, for example by capturing the white bishop, then the rook captures the queen, and it's clear that now black's position is pretty hopeless. But you may wonder, in the beginning position, what should you do then? Well, the best thing that black can do here is to move the king out of that pin. On one hand, so now the queen actually is threatening the pawn on d5, but also on the other hand, that for example compared to some other move like h6, when white could then attack the pawn on g7 a second time, and then that pawn cannot move because it's pinned. So that's a second reason why it's a good idea to get the king out of the pin and play king g8. Okay, so we learned so far a whole bunch of different patterns in this lesson. We learned about stalemate in the beginning, In the last example we learned about fork. In this one, discovery. We had skewer. We had back rank trouble. So we learned quite a bit already and more to come. The next example will deal with a pin. Let's look at this position right here, where again it is black who has the material advantage at the moment. And indeed, if it was black's turn right now, black would be playing for a win. However, sadly for black, it was white's turn. And the problem again is those forceful moves. If white would try immediately right now attacking the black queen, the black queen would be a free lady and could move away and in fact immediately capture white's pawn, and with a check, and when the king moves out of the check, capture the bishop with a second check, and then capture even a pawn. So that would certainly be a horrible choice for white. On the other hand, look how things become very different. If white first gives the check with the bishop, the other bishop, of course the queen takes bishop now, then the pawn captures the queen. On the other hand, when the king moves out of the check, all of a sudden the black king and queen find themselves on the same diagonal. And that's very dangerous when there is a bishop that come and attack both of those pieces. So right now the black queen is pinned, and the best black can do is to give up the queen for the bishop, but even here it's clear that white has an extra bishop, which is generally a winning advantage in an endgame where there are still numerous pawns on the board. Very nice example. And let's continue with the next example. Again in this position it is black is who is ahead, having an extra queen and an extra pawn. White again only has a rook and a minor piece, which is only 8 points compared to a queen, which is 9, plus remember black has an extra pawn. Black here has many good moves, including the check with the queen coming to f2 and then grabbing the pawn on g3. On the other hand, the move that black tried in this game, queen c6, was a major mistake. It seems like a reasonable move attacking the white rook. However, appearances can be deceiving. And again, it's very important, just like when you're getting a check, not to immediately touch your king and move your king out of the check, but be open for other additional ideas. Like in this case, the rook is attacked, but we don't need to automatically touch our rook and move it out of danger's way. In this case, white has a much better idea. Go for the offense instead of defense. Namely, give a check with a knight, use the pin, that the black pawn from h7 is unable to capture white's knight right now. And then when the king moves to g8, then white is ready. Again, not moving the rook, but give a fork. A very nice move. Black is in a check, and therefore the queen will be lost. Let's move on. Here we are. And yet again a position where black seems to be ahead. And white right now made a natural move, capturing the black bishop. What would be your first idea here? I bet it was to capture the white knight. And that is fine, that should be your first idea. However, ideally, your second idea right after that should be that actually realizing that that would be a blunder. The reason why this is a blunder, because it would lose the queen. Why? Because white would get to advance the d pawn forward, and at the same time, when this pawn now attacks the black queen on e7, it has also opened up the diagonal of white's bishop, and that means that the black king is also in a check at the same time while the black queen is attacked. So black has no choice, get out of the check or block the check, but the queen will be lost in any case. Now, what's the important lesson from this position? Well, first of all, it's not everything gold that shines. So just because you have a knight that you can capture, it does not necessarily mean that that's your best choice. In fact, as we've seen in this example, that would be a rather poor choice. Most other moves would be better. For example, black could play rook to f8, and the main thing is not to capture the knight as long as that discovery is in the air. Another option would be to move the queen, which is a better option, because now on one hand we're attacking the bishop on f3, but more importantly we moved the queen away from the danger we've seen before. So now, for example, if the bishop moves away from the attack, already black is free and ready to capture on b7, because now the same discovery check is not quite the same. While it is still a discovered check, it lost its power. Why? Because the queen is no longer on e7. So black can simply move out of the check and then maintain its humongous material advantage. And finally, here is our last example of this lesson. Here again, black has a queen while white doesn't. In fact, unlike in some of the previous examples, all white has is a bishop and a couple pawns as compensation. So generally speaking, it should be only a matter of time that black wins this game, not if they win the game. If it were black's turn right now, black should hurry up and make sure that their queen on h6 gets some breathing room and gets some ability to move, because as you can see at the moment, anywhere that queen would try to move to, it would be captured. So black would or should move his king somewhere to free up some space for the queen. Or black could achieve that also by moving the g6 pawn up, so the black queen would have some squares then to run to. However, in our example, it is white's turn. And white should immediately not waste time, take advantage of it. Because, for example, playing h4 would be a poor choice, because after king f8 and g5, the queen could run away. So that's why it's really important to act promptly and go after the black queen right away. g5 attacks the queen still has a square to go to with queen h5, but now white is ready to attack the queen a final time, a second time, and now the queen is lost. Anywhere the queen goes, it will be captured. The best black can do, at least to get white's bishop as a compensation, but now the resulting position is a two pawn up endgame, pawn endgame, that is very easily winning, because white will simply advance these pawns on the queen side, create a passed pawn, and even if the black king hurries up and stops the pawn from promoting on the queen side, that will mean that the white king has a free range on the king side and can create another passed pawn over here, this side of the board. So generally, as I said, endgames with two extra pawns without a dangerous passed pawn that's about to become a queen for the other side, it's a simple win. So here in this endgame, the tragedy for black was the unfortunate positioning of the queen, and then the queen got trapped. Be always super careful not to surround your own queen with too many of your own pieces, and then of course if the opponent is trying to get his own pieces around your queen, make sure there is at least one or two squares where your queen can run away to. Otherwise, it can end like it did in this example for black.